Hello. Tonight we begin in a place before beginnings, a moment without sky, without earth, without even the idea of time, where everything that would one day become mountains, rivers, people, and dreams rests inside a quiet, formless darkness. The world is not yet a world. There is no sound of wind through trees, no echo of footsteps on stone, only a deep stillness that feels endless and patient. In many early Chinese myths, this state is called Hundun primordial chaos, a vast, undivided presence that holds every possibility but has not yet chosen a shape. Ancient texts, such as the Huainanzi, describe this early universe not as a battle or a violent explosion, but as something more like a dense cloud drifting in silence, waiting for the first change to arrive. You can almost imagine floating there, with nothing pressing you forward, nothing pulling you back, the darkness breathing slowly around you. Inside this soft, shapeless expanse, there is no above or below, there is no day or night, there is only a gentle heaviness, like fog resting on still water. The air, if it can even be called air, feels thick, calm, and untouched, and yet within that calm, something faint begins to stir. It is not loud, not sudden, not dramatic. It is more like a slow awakening, the first quiet suggestion that difference might exist, that warmth might drift away from cold, that light might one day separate from shadow. This is where yin and yang begin their earliest motion, long before they receive names, long before philosophers describe them in books and symbols. At first they are only tendencies, subtle directions inside the chaos, one growing heavier and more tranquil, the other rising lighter and brighter. The listeners of these stories in ancient times did not imagine a violent creator tearing the world apart. Instead, they pictured the universe behaving the way mist lifts at dawn, or the way a pond slowly clears after mud settles. Change emerges, not through force, but through patience. The darkness gradually thickens in some places and thins in others. The heavier essence drifts downward, as if searching for rest. The lighter essence lifts upward, like breath exhaled into an empty sky that does not yet exist. There is no rush. The process unfolds at a pace so slow it almost feels like stillness. And in this slowness, the first hint of direction appears, as though the universe takes a quiet, steady breath for the very first time. In later traditions, scholars and storytellers looked back on this early myth and saw more than cosmic imagery. They saw a reflection of the world they lived in, a world where balance mattered more than domination. In Chinese thought, order emerges gradually, shaped by harmony rather than conflict. Even at the beginning of everything, the story prefers calmness over chaos, rhythm over noise. The myth becomes not just a tale of creation but a quiet lesson that many beginnings in life are soft, unhurried, and hard to notice while they are happening. The darkness shifts, and the idea of a boundary begins to form. It is fragile at first, like the thin line between waking and sleep. The lighter essence seems to rise, becoming clearer, stretching outward into something that will one day resemble the heavens. The heavier essence settles downward, pressing itself into what will become earth. Between them lies a space that is neither one nor the other, a threshold that holds the promise of structure. If you were standing inside that moment, if standing were even possible, you might feel the difference the way you feel the first cool breeze after a long, still afternoon. The universe feels as though it is gathering itself, preparing quietly for what comes next. And even though nothing has fully emerged, the silence no longer feels empty. It feels expectant, like a room waiting for someone to light a lantern. Some storytellers describe this early state as a cosmic egg, an unbroken shell holding the world inside. It is not yet cracked, not yet opened, but it already contains mountains, oceans, clouds, and life in their earliest, shapeless forms. The image appears in many retellings across centuries, from philosophical texts to folk legends, and each time it returns, it brings the same sense of enclosed calm. The universe is not born by accident. It is nurtured, held together in darkness until the right moment. To many listeners, this idea feels strangely comforting. Before fear, before struggle, before history itself, the universe rests inside a quiet shell. Nothing rushes, nothing fractures. Everything waits. And that waiting becomes part of the myth, a reminder that growth often requires stillness first, that transformation does not always begin with noise. As the heavier and lighter essences continue to drift apart, a faint structure begins to appear. There is no cutting, no tearing, no violent breaking. Instead, the separation feels like a slow settling of layers, the way sediment rests at the bottom of a river while the water above remains clear. This gentle separation will eventually allow mountains to rise, rivers to carve their paths, clouds to form in high unseen spaces. But for now, everything remains quiet. The world breathes softly for the very first time. A light, distant glow begins to form in the place that will become the sky. Not bright enough yet to be called sun or star, only a suggestion of warmth. Below, the heavier essence deepens into something firm and silent, preparing to become ground. The earliest rhythm of existence begins, almost imperceptible expansion and settling, rising and resting, a slow pulse that will one day shape storms, seasons, and the turning of years. Even at this earliest stage, the myth carries reflection. The people who told and retold these stories lived in landscapes of river valleys, mountains, and open plains. They watched mist gather at dawn and disperse by morning. They saw clouds drift low across fields before lifting into the wide sky. For them, it felt natural that the world itself might have formed in the same gentle rhythm. The myth was not only a tale about the distant past, it was a mirror of the world they saw each day. And as this vast, patient process unfolds, the listener is invited to slow with it, to breathe at the same pace, to notice the quiet distances between sounds. Perhaps in that slow quiet there is a kind of comfort, that the universe did not begin with fear or violence, but with stillness and balance. Just like us, the earliest storytellers wondered what it meant to emerge from uncertainty, to step from formlessness into shape, and they wrapped that question inside a dreamlike origin, both mysterious and reassuring at the same time. Some versions of the tradition speak of how chaos was not something to defeat, but something to organize, like tidying a room instead of destroying it. One old scholar might have smiled and added that even the universe, at the beginning, needed time to wake up properly, a rare, gentle moment of humor in a story so ancient and vast. The separation continues, and the quiet expanse grows wider, more defined. The light essence gathers softly upward, the heavy essence settles downward. A slow, steady distance grows between them, but the connection is never broken. Yin and yang remain intertwined, each shaping the other, each impossible without its counterpart. The world to be does not choose only light or only darkness, it learns to carry both. Soon, inside the cosmic egg, inside this growing space between earth and sky, something more begins to form. Not yet a figure, not yet a presence, but the faint suggestion of awareness. A long, patient consciousness resting within the shell of the universe, waiting for the moment when separation becomes structure and structure becomes world. The silence remains deep, but it is no longer empty. It feels like the breath held before a story begins, like the pause before the first step onto an untraveled path. The universe has taken its first quiet movement toward becoming itself, and somewhere within that slowly widening space, a great being lies sleeping, gathering strength in the darkness as the shell that holds him begins, at last, to stretch. And as it stretches, the great being within Pangu slowly awakens in the darkness, feeling the quiet pressure of a world not yet formed resting around him like layers of heavy mist. For a long time he does not move. He listens to the silence, to the deep stillness inside the cosmic egg, and senses that the heavens and the earth are pressed tightly together, without space to breathe, without room for light or distance or sky. His awakening is not sudden. It unfolds the way dawn unfolds across a valley, first as awareness, then as intention, and only afterward as motion. Within that dim enclosure, the air is dense and warm, as though the universe is holding its breath. The surface around him curves on every side, enclosing him in a shell that is vast and yet intimate, like a cave without walls or a mountain without edges. When he finally stretches his limbs, the movement is slow and deliberate. His arms reach outward, his legs press downward, and the pressure of his body finds the faint boundary between what will rise and what will settle. The moment of separation is not violent. It feels like a deep, careful exhale. Pangu lifts his head and shoulders, and the space above begins to lighten, while the space below grows heavier, thicker, more solid. In many tellings, he grows taller each day, pushing sky and earth farther apart with patient strength. Some classical sources, such as the 3rd century Sanwu Liji attributed to Xu Zheng, record that he continued this work for 18,000 years, a symbol not of struggle, but of endurance and steady purpose. The myth imagines creation not as a single dramatic instant, but as a long, thoughtful labor. Above him, the sky rises like a great dome, thin and fragile at first, then gradually broader and clearer. Below him, the ground settles into quiet firmness, layer upon layer, like sediment finding its place at the bottom of a river. Dust becomes soil, vapor becomes cloud, breath becomes wind. The world begins to organize itself around his motion, and yet the atmosphere stays calm, unhurried, almost meditative. You can almost feel the cool, high air forming around his lifted arms, the faint scent of stone and damp earth gathering below his feet. Each day that passes, if day can even be measured in this new world, his body continues to grow, matching the widening distance between heaven and earth. His back straightens, his legs root themselves into the forming ground, and his shoulders brace beneath the rising sky. He does not shout. He does not rage. He simply holds the world apart, the way a bridge holds the weight of those who cross it, silent yet essential. In this calm effort there is a kind of dignity, a quiet strength that reflects the values of the people who cherished this story: patience, steadiness, and harmony with the task at hand. Around him the darkness thins into shadow. The air begins to move, drifting softly like the first breeze through a valley at dusk. Shapes emerge. Rocks gather, resting in low places. Water pools in hollows that will one day become lakes and rivers. The world discovers form the way a sculptor discovers a figure hidden inside stone slowly, by removing confusion and leaving only what belongs. Pangu stands at the heart of this growing landscape, his body a pillar, his breath a rhythm that echoes through the widening space. Time passes in long, gentle stretches. Some versions of the tale say that Pangu used a great axe to help separate heaven from earth, but even in those images the gesture is not one of destruction, it is a gesture of clarification. The difference between tangled roots and a carefully tended garden. As the distance grows larger, the sky becomes brighter and steadier. The earth beneath becomes stronger, its surface cool in some places and warm in others, as if it is learning the language of mountains and plains. The world feels young, but no longer uncertain. There are moments when the shell of the old chaos trembles, and for an instant the sky seems to sink, the earth seems to rise, and everything threatens to fold back into formlessness. Each time Pangu braces himself and continues to lift, his body adapting, his spirit quiet and resolute. The myth suggests something deeply human here, the effort to hold order together, to create space for life, to stand steady when everything around feels close to collapsing. Just like us, the storytellers understood that some of the greatest labors in life are the ones no one sees, carried out in silence, with only patience as a companion. At last, when the heavens have risen high enough and the earth has settled firm enough, the world no longer presses inward, it holds its shape. The air becomes lighter and clearer, and the sky above opens into wide, pale distance. Pangu senses that his work is almost complete. He lowers his shoulders slightly, not in exhaustion but in quiet relief, like a craftsman stepping back from a finished bridge and seeing that it stands on its own. Around him, the forming world rests, peaceful and still. In many later retellings, his body becomes the landscape itself, a final act of generosity. His breath becomes the mist that drifts across valleys at dawn. His voice becomes the rolling thunder that echoes among distant peaks. His left eye becomes the sun, warm and steady. His right eye becomes the moon, cool and reflective. His blood becomes rivers, winding across the land like silver threads. His bones harden into mountains. His hair becomes forests. His flesh becomes soil rich enough to nourish life. Whether taken literally or understood as symbol, the image is gentle rather than tragic, the idea that the world is not built from destruction, but from transformation and offering. The land that grows from him is not harsh or rigid. It curves softly, with slopes that rise and fall like a slow breath. The rivers do not tear across the earth. They wander, patient and unhurried, shaping the land by guiding water rather than resisting it. Valleys cradle quiet streams. Low hills hold the warmth of afternoon light. The mountains stand not as barriers but as guardians, watching the wide space between heaven and earth with silent calm. In this world, everything seems connected to the being who once held it apart. As the landscape settles, a new kind of stillness fills the air, not the empty stillness of chaos, but the restful stillness of something finally at peace with its shape. Wind drifts across forming plains, carrying the faint smell of stone and new soil. Clouds gather in soft bands high above, moving slowly, as if careful not to disturb the delicate balance below. The sky no longer presses downward. The earth no longer strains upward. Both simply exist, each in its place, held together by the memory of Pangu's long, patient work. People who told this story across generations found meaning in its quiet lessons. They lived in landscapes shaped by rivers and mountains, where life depended on working with nature rather than against it. In Pangu's calm separation of sky and earth, they saw a reflection of their own world, that strength is often steady rather than fierce, that creation can emerge through time and care, and that harmony is built by guiding forces gently instead of confronting them. The myth becomes, in this way, less a tale of a distant past and more a soft meditation on how order and balance are sustained. There is sometimes one small smile woven into the tradition, the idea that if Pangu ever stopped growing too soon, the heavens might have sagged back toward the earth, as though even the universe occasionally needed someone tall enough to fix a ceiling. It is a light, almost playful thought, resting quietly inside a story otherwise filled with stillness and reverence, and it reminds us that even great myths can carry a human warmth. When Pangu's work is finished, the space between heaven and earth stands wide and open. The world has room now, room for mountains to lift their smooth backs toward the sky, room for rivers to braid across the lowlands, room for clouds to drift without touching the ground. His presence fades into the landscape, not as absence, but as foundation. The mountains remember his strength, the rivers remember his movement, the wind remembers his breath, and the sky, now steady and vast, holds the promise of light that has not yet fully awakened. Somewhere within that calm expanse, the air begins to brighten gently. It is not yet day, not yet night, only a soft glow gathering beyond the horizon, as if the world is waiting for something warm to rise and trace its first path across the newborn sky, quiet and patient as an unrisen sun. And in that expectant stillness, the first faint light begins to gather at the edge of the newborn sky. It does not arrive all at once. It spills slowly, like pale gold seeping through a thin veil of cloud, softening the horizon and warming the quiet air above the resting earth. The world, which has known only shadow and silence, feels its first gentle glow, and time, though no one has yet named it, begins its long, measured movement forward. The light stretches outward, gliding across the heavens as if the sky itself is learning to breathe in a new rhythm. In some of the oldest Chinese traditions, there is not just one sun at the beginning, but 10 suns, each perched upon the branches of a vast cosmic tree said to grow in the eastern reaches of the world. The image appears in stories preserved through classical sources such as the Shanhai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas, where myth and geography fold gently into one another. These suns do not blaze fiercely at first. They move in slow procession, taking turns to rise across the heavens, one at a time, teaching the sky how to shine without burning the fragile land below. Each morning, one sun steps forward, its light drifting across the wide expanse that Pangu once held apart. It lifts from the horizon like a glowing disk, warming the new rivers, coloring the slopes of forming mountains with soft amber light. The world awakens beneath it not with noise, but with quiet presence. Shadows appear for the first time, stretching long and thin across the ground. Valleys fill with gentle brightness. The sky gains depth and distance, its pale blue unfolding in calm layers. When that single sun completes its journey, it returns to rest among the branches, and another takes its place the next day, rising and crossing the heavens along the same patient path. In this slow rotation, the world learns sequence, one moment following another, one day leaning gently into the next. Though no clocks exist, no sand drips through an hourglass, the rhythm is unmistakable. Morning, afternoon, evening, and darkness return in a steady cycle, and the land begins to understand what it means to wait for light, to live inside the turning of time. With the suns come warmth and clarity. Mist lifts from the valleys and drifts toward distant ridges. The surfaces of lakes shimmer softly, catching the glow and scattering it like threads of gold across the water. The air carries the faint scent of damp earth and clean stone. The light does not erase the darkness completely, it moves alongside it, shaping contrast rather than conquering it. In this balance, the earliest days are gentle, as if the universe wishes to ease the world into awareness. And then, when daylight finishes its long, patient arc, a different glow emerges from the quiet sky. It rises not with heat, but with cool, silvery calm. The moon steps into the heavens, its light soft and steady, tracing a tender curve above the sleeping earth. Where the suns teach brightness and activity, the moon teaches stillness. It brings shadows that rest rather than hide, and silence that comforts instead of isolates. Its reflection trembles lightly upon the surface of lakes and rivers, turning water into slow-moving silver ribbons beneath the night. The moon does not remain the same shape each night. It thins, widens, grows full, then gently fades again. Its changing face becomes the world's first calendar, a quiet measure of passing time. Early farmers and observers would one day follow its rhythm, marking seasons, recording floods and harvests. But even here, in myth's earliest dawn, its cycle already feels like a promise. Nothing remains fixed. Everything moves through phases. Loss gives way to return. Emptiness curves back toward fullness. Between the suns and the moon, the world learns that light itself has a temperament. Daylight moves across the landscape with warmth and clarity. Moonlight rests upon it with cool, reflective grace. Together they weave a pattern of alternation, and time becomes not a straight, unbroken line, but a circle that repeats, patient and reassuring. The sky no longer feels like an empty dome. It feels alive, a great, quiet theatre where light and shadow take turns speaking. As the suns continue their procession, the air takes on new character. Early mornings feel crisp and gentle. Afternoons glow softly with heat, but never overwhelm. Near dusk, the light deepens into warm amber, brushing the hills with color before sinking back toward the horizon. You can almost imagine standing at the edge of a forming plain, the faint wind carrying the scent of grass and stone, watching the final edge of light dissolve into evening. In that moment, the sky seems to hold its breath, and then night arrives, calm and unafraid. The myth of the 10 suns also carries a reflection about restraint and balance. Later retellings remember a time when the suns briefly rose all together, filling the heavens at once, their combined heat, drying rivers and scorching valleys until the archer Ho-Yi intervened to restore order. But in this early peaceful age, that crisis has not yet come. The suns respect their rhythm, each knows its turn. The world survives not because one force dominates, but because every force understands its place in the larger pattern. And as these cycles continue, the concept of time begins to settle into the world like a gentle presence. Time does not rush here. It does not push or drag. It flows the way a river flows around smooth stones, steady and unhurried. Days unfold like soft pages turning in a book no one is in a hurry to finish. The sky changes, and through that change the world learns memory. Yesterday leaves quiet traces. Tomorrow approaches softly. The present moment stretches, calm and complete. For the people who carried these stories across centuries, this rhythm was never just a distant mythic memory. It echoed the rhythms they lived by: the slow rise of dawn over rice fields, the shimmering heat of midday, the cool breath of evening air settling across village roofs. The myth did not separate human life from the cosmos. It placed both within the same unfolding pattern. Just as the suns rise and rest, people work and rest. Just as the moon waxes and fades, hopes grow and soften, grief passes and returns, and life continues in cycles that rarely move in a straight line. There is a quiet comfort in that thought, that even when change feels uncertain, it unfolds inside a rhythm older than fear, a rhythm that belongs not to rulers or armies, but to the sky itself. The myth becomes less a story about distant celestial beings and more a reflection on how people learn to live with the passage of time, not by resisting it, but by recognizing its pattern. The way one might listen to the tide and eventually realize it always comes back. Above the silent mountains, the suns continue their patient rotation. Their light traces the arcs of valleys and hilltops, revealing textures that were once hidden in darkness: the roughness of stone, the smooth curves of riverbanks, the gentle folds of distant slopes. In the evenings, the moon glides into their place, its reflection shimmering across the slow movement of water. Nights become places of contemplation rather than fear. The darkness is no longer empty, it is filled with silver light and quiet assurance. Sometimes storytellers imagined the suns perched like bright birds upon their great tree at dawn, waiting for their turn to fly. One might smile and say that perhaps even celestial bodies appreciate a well-organized schedule, a small, gentle humor tucked inside a cosmic legend, as if reminding listeners that order, when balanced, can feel both grand and familiar. Over time, though time itself is still new, the repeated movement of light and shadow shapes the land as much as wind and water do. Plants lean toward the warmth, waters swell and recede beneath the moon's faint pull. The world learns rhythm, and rhythm becomes structure. Seasons will one day emerge from this same pattern: spring following winter, harvest following growth, but for now the cycle of suns and moon is enough to give meaning to the passing days. The sky, once a blank openness, now carries traces of continuity. Each sunrise echoes the last, yet never feels identical. Each moonlit night resembles the one before, yet holds its own quiet character, a slightly different angle of light across a mountain ridge, a slightly different shimmer on the water's surface. The world grows familiar with its own repetition, and in that familiarity finds a kind of peace. And as the suns rise in their long procession, as the moon traces its cool silver path, the world settles deeper into this rhythm of cycles and change. Light no longer feels like a stranger. Time no longer feels shapeless. Instead, the sky feels like a steady companion, guiding the land gently forward toward new stories, new movements, and the quiet unfolding of everything still yet to come, where creation begins to turn its attention from heavens and light toward the first fragile shapes of life itself. And as the rivers wind softly through the forming valleys, a gentle presence appears beside their banks, Nüwa, the compassionate goddess whose quiet patience mirrors the calm movement of the world around her. She does not arrive with thunder or fire. She steps into the landscape the way mist steps across a meadow at dawn, almost unnoticed, yet deeply felt. The air near the river feels warmer, the light softer, as if the earth itself recognizes her and rests more peacefully in her presence. Nüwa walks along the water's edge, where the soil is smooth and cool beneath her feet, and the river glides past with a slow, steady rhythm. Reeds sway softly in the breeze. The scent of damp clay drifts into the air, mixed with the faint mineral smell of stone warmed by sunlight. The world is quiet here, not empty, but waiting, like a blank page holding the promise of a story not yet written. She pauses, kneels, and lets her fingers sink gently into the wet earth. The clay is soft and yielding. It clings lightly to her hands, cool and textured, shaped by water and time. In Chinese tradition, clay carried a symbolic closeness to life used in pottery, in vessels for food and offerings, and in the myth of Nüwa, it becomes the substance from which humanity takes form. She lifts a small handful of this riverbank earth and rolls it carefully between her palms. The motion is patient, almost meditative, as though each movement carries both care and responsibility. With slow precision, she shapes the first figure, small, delicate, and humble in form. A head, a body, arms, and legs, smoothed gently with her thumb. There is no rush, no command, no spectacle, only quiet attention. She places the tiny figure upon the ground, and as the clay meets the earth, it trembles softly, then breathes, its eyes open. Its chest rises. It stands, unsteady at first, like a newborn animal taking its first cautious step beneath the open sky. The first human does not speak. It simply looks around at the river's gleam, at the sky stretching wide above, at the land unfolding into hills and quiet plains, and the world feels suddenly fuller, warmer, more aware of itself. Nüwa watches with calm affection. Then she shapes another, and another. Each form is slightly different. Some stand tall, some are small and round and gentle. Some carry more strength in their shoulders, others more softness in their posture. Even in myth, variation appears naturally, as if individuality is woven into creation from the beginning. In some tellings preserved through early literature, Nüwa shapes the first people by hand, one by one, with patience and tenderness. Later versions add a simple tool, a cord dipped into clay and flicked across the ground, forming many people at once, hinting at social differences. Those molded carefully by hand become the noble or influential, while those formed more quickly become the ordinary workers of the world. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the idea reflects an early observation about society that people live different lives, yet share the same origin, the same earth, the same breath. The river beside her flows steadily, reflecting the sky in gentle ripples. Its sound is soft and constant, like a low voice repeating an ancient lullaby. As more figures awaken along the banks, The air fills with the faint rustle of movement, footsteps in damp soil, soft breaths, quiet murmurs of curiosity. The people begin to explore their new world. They touch the bark of young trees. They cup cool river water in their hands. They feel the warmth of sunlight on their skin and the coolness of evening drifting gently across the land. Nüwa does not command them. She does not rule or threaten. She simply watches, offering presence rather than authority, care rather than control. In this way, the myth of humanity's creation becomes deeply human in tone, not a tale of obedience and fear, but one of connection and belonging. The people do not serve the world, they share it. They learn slowly, through experience and observation, through mistakes and discovery, the way human communities would continue to learn across centuries. The land around them is calm. Grasses sway in long fields, brushing softly against their ankles. Birds circle lazily in the sky, their shadows sweeping across the ground in wide, slow arcs. At night, the moon casts silver light over the river, and the new humans rest near one another, warmed by the faint glow of stars overhead. They listen to the wind moving gently through reeds, to the quiet lapping of water against the shore. Even in this earliest chapter of existence, there is already a sense of companionship, people gathered together, sharing warmth and presence beneath the open sky. But creation, in these stories, is rarely complete without challenge. One day, the heavens fracture. The sky, once steady and high, opens in jagged seams, as if the vast dome above has cracked like pottery struck by invisible hands. The land trembles softly, mountains tilt. Smoke and dust drift upward, and fiery light spills through the wounded sky. The boundary Pangu once held apart feels suddenly fragile again, and for a moment the world wavers between harmony and collapse. Nüwa lifts her gaze toward the broken firmament. She does not panic. The myth does not paint her as a warrior who charges into battle, but as a caretaker who sees damage and chooses repair. The air smells of stone and ash. The wind carries the faint sound of distant rumbling. Rivers begin to overflow their banks, and smoke-stained light casts long, uneasy shadows across the land. The people she created look upward in fear, uncertain and small beneath the fractured heavens. So she moves with quiet resolve. The story tells that Nüwa travels across the world, searching for the materials she needs to mend the sky. She finds stones of 5 colors: red, yellow, blue, white, and black hues connected to classical Chinese cosmology and to the cycles that later shaped philosophy, medicine, and governance. She gathers them patiently in mountains and valleys, along riverbeds and cliffs. Each stone carries a different quality, a different harmony, and together they reflect the idea that the world itself is made whole through balance, not uniformity. She melts these stones into glowing liquid light, their colors blending and swirling like slow-moving fire beneath her careful hands. The air grows warm around her. The sky above flickers with fractured light. With deliberate, steady motions, she lifts this molten essence upward and presses it gently into the torn places of the heavens. Where once there were cracks, there are now luminous seams, not hidden, not erased, but transformed, like gold filling the breaks in a repaired vessel. As she works, the world grows quieter. The trembling softens, the rivers calm, smoke fades into pale, drifting mist. The fractures begin to fade beneath her touch, the sky settling once again into broad and stable calm. Wind moves across the land, no longer sharp or restless, but slow and steady. The people watch in silence, their fear easing into gratitude, their uncertainty melting into a sense of safety beneath the mended sky. Some versions of the tale add other acts of restoration, Nüwa cutting the legs from a great turtle to set the 4 corners of the earth, or taming the forces that threaten to overwhelm creation. Whether told literally or symbolically, these images point toward the same idea that order is something tended and protected, not won through force, but preserved through care and attention. When the sky is finally whole again, a deep stillness settles over the world. Light returns to its calm rhythm. Clouds drift across the repaired firmament with gentle confidence. The rivers wind peacefully through their channels, as though grateful for the guidance of steady banks. The air carries the faint scent of cooled stone and damp soil after rain. Life exhales. The people lift their faces to the open heavens and feel, perhaps for the first time, that this world truly belongs to them, and they to it. In the myth, Nüwa does not stand above humanity as a distant authority. She exists beside them as maker, protector, and quiet guardian. Her presence suggests something essential, that the act of caring for the world is as important as the act of creating it. That to mend what is broken, whether sky, land, or relationship, is a sacred responsibility. Just like us, the storytellers must have known what it feels like to see cracks appear in the things they depend on, and to hope for patient hands kind enough to repair them. The new humans, shaped from river clay and sheltered beneath the healed heavens, begin to walk farther across the landscape. They follow winding paths along hillsides. They gather near streams and low valleys. They learn to live with one another, to share food, to build small shelters, to watch the seasons shift in gentle cycles of warmth and cold. Their footsteps deepen into the soil, and in time, their presence becomes part of the world's memory, like faint footprints that never fully fade. The sky above them carries faint traces of Nüwa's handiwork, as if the seams of her repairs glow softly when the sun sets, or when the moon casts its pale light across the firmament. The image is not one of perfection but of resilience, a reminder that even the heavens once broke and were lovingly mended, and that beauty can rest calmly beside imperfection. Night falls gently, and the people rest beside the same rivers where their bodies were first shaped. The cool air brushes lightly across their skin. The water drifts past with its steady sound, never hurrying, never stopping. The sky above repaired, enduring, and expansive watches quietly over them all. And from within that deep, calm stillness, the world begins to look beyond creation and survival, toward the vast landscapes, waters, and mountains that will soon be shaped not by gods alone, but by the forces of flood, earth, and human perseverance, waiting patiently just beyond the horizon. And as the repaired sky settles above the newborn world, the first rain begins to gather, not as a gentle mist, but as a slow and widening weight that drifts across the valleys and plains. In the quiet hush after creation, the earth breathes, the rivers stretch, and the land waits. The clouds deepen, the horizon softens. What begins as a trickle becomes a steady flood, and the world enters an age where water, patient and unhurried, decides the shape of mountains and the fate of villages. They told of a time when the rivers no longer stayed in their banks, when lowlands faded beneath rising water, and fields that once held crops dissolved into long mirrors of sky. This was not a single storm or a single season. It was a slow, enduring transformation, as if the world itself had forgotten its boundaries. The great flood, they said, did not roar in anger. It pressed forward with persistence, filling basins, swallowing valleys, spreading across the land like an endless wandering sea. You can almost picture it, grey light drifting across a drowned plain, reeds bending beneath a wide and restless surface, broken rooftops peeking out like islands of memory. There is no chaos in the way the water moves. It advances with the weight of time, neither rushed nor hesitant, only certain. The air smells of wet earth and old wood. The wind passes low and quiet, brushing across silent waters where villages once stood. People lived through this, and they remembered it. In later ages, historians would write of early China along the Yellow River, where real floods carved new channels and erased entire settlements. Archaeologists would uncover signs of silt and water layers that marked disaster and adaptation. Myths and memory worked side by side, turning hardship into story and story into guidance. In the world of legend, the flood became more than a natural event. It became a lesson in patience, resilience, and the art of working with forces greater than oneself. In these stories, a figure emerges from the mist of time, Gun, a determined leader who believed he could hold the waters back by force. He built barriers, high walls, and embankments meant to trap the flood and keep the land dry. For a moment, it seemed to work, but water does not accept confinement easily. It seeped through cracks, slipped beneath stone, and rose again, stronger than before. The embankments failed, and the waters spread, slower, wider, more enduring than any wall. The myth does not present Gun as a villain. He is earnest, stubborn, perhaps too confident in his will. His struggle feels familiar, the instinct to control, to resist, to stand against the storm. Yet the world of water teaches differently. The rivers do not respond to force. They curve, adapt, and find paths you cannot see. In time, Gun's efforts end, and the story turns to his son, Yu. Yu does not arrive as a conqueror. He does not bring louder commands or higher walls. Instead, he walks into the flooded world with a different understanding. He listens to the water. He studies its movements. He watches where it gathers, where it spills, where it wants to go. Step by slow step, he moves through valleys and mountains, tracing the quiet paths that lie hidden beneath the surface. The myth says that Yu traveled for years, crossing ranges, plains, and river mouths, rarely stopping to rest. He passed through villages without entering, through homes without stepping inside. Even when he neared his own doorway, he did not pause, because to stop meant delaying the work and allowing the waters to linger longer over fields and homes. The story is gentle in its description, almost understated, yet the devotion within it feels deep and steady, like the rivers he studied. The atmosphere around Yu's journey is quiet. The world is grey-blue with mist. Mud clings to his feet. The sound of water is constant, a low murmur where it slips across stone, a broad hush where it spreads wide into an open plain. He is never portrayed as rushing. Each movement is deliberate, each choice thoughtful. He digs channels where the land is low. He opens passages that guide water toward the sea, instead of trapping it in angry pools. He carves small paths instead of giant walls, allowing the flood to move, to settle, to return to places where it belongs. In that calm approach lies the heart of the tale. Instead of fighting the world, Yu learns to read it. Instead of resisting the flood, he walks with it. The myth becomes a reflection of early philosophies that would later shape Chinese thought: harmony over dominance, alignment over struggle, patience over force. Just as farmers learn to plant with the seasons, not against them, Yu learns to shape the waters by understanding their nature. A quiet historical echo sits beneath the story. Ancient China truly did develop complex systems of canals, irrigation networks, and river management. Early states along the Yellow River Valley thrived where water was guided rather than blocked. The legend of Yu, later associated with the founding of the Xia dynasty, preserved the memory of these early achievements. It transformed engineering into story, and story into something like wisdom. As Yu works, the land begins to change. Channels stretch outward like silver threads. Rivers deepen into steady pathways. Swamps shrink back into wetlands, where reeds sway gently in the evening breeze. Villages slowly reappear at the edges of the retreating flood, their walls stained with the memory of high water. Fields are cleared again. The smell of wet soil turns from loss into renewal. You might imagine families standing at the edge of the new channels, watching water glide through them with a quiet, steady motion. There is no triumphant noise, no sudden shift. Instead, there is a gradual relief, like tension slowly leaving a tired body. The world feels as if it exhaled for the first time in years. Along the riverbanks, people rebuild. They place their homes on higher ground. They learn where the soil is rich and where the currents run too strong. The flood becomes a teacher, and the teacher's lesson is balance. It reminds them that power does not always arrive through strength. Sometimes it arrives through understanding. The tale lingers on this idea. Yu is remembered not only as someone who shaped the land, but as someone who shaped a way of thinking. His patience becomes a form of leadership. His willingness to walk the land, listen to its movements, and work with its rhythms becomes a model for how rulers might guide people. In later retellings, Yu is not just a figure of myth. He is a symbol of responsibility of a leader who serves through action rather than command. There is a quiet reflection in this, one that touches our own lives. Just like those early communities, people today face currents. They cannot control moments when circumstances rise like water and reshape everything familiar. The story suggests that persistence and gentleness can exist together, that sometimes the path forward is not to resist but to understand. It reminds us that the world does not always bend by force, but often responds to patience and careful attention. As the flood recedes in the story, the land does not return to what it was before. It becomes something new. Rivers now follow deeper channels. Lakes rest where flat ground once stretched. The map of the world has changed, and people adapt to a landscape reshaped by water and time. The myth shows creation not as a single moment, but as a continuing process, the world forming and reforming through challenge and response. Evening settles across the valleys of the tale. The sky takes on a pale, soft glow. The air cools, and the scent of clean water drifts over stone and soil. Villagers light small lamps near the entrances of their homes. A quiet sense of order returns, not the rigid order of control, but the living order of harmony, flexible, breathing, and calm. Some versions say that when Yu finally completed his work, he paused beside a great river and listened. The water moved smoothly toward the horizon, its motion neither hurried nor weak. In that simple movement, he saw the balance he had been seeking, a world where nature and people share space without trying to overpower one another. He did not claim victory. He simply nodded and continued walking, as if the journey itself had become part of the land. A light, almost gentle smile touches the story at times, the kind of quiet humor that belongs to memory rather than jest, as if the people who retold it knew that, in truth, the world never stays fully under control. Rivers will rise again, storms will return, and still, each generation learns, adjusts, and begins the slow work anew. The flood becomes a chapter, not an ending. It shapes thinking, guiding later tales toward ideas of leadership rooted in care and responsibility. In that calm transformation from disaster to understanding, from panic to patience, the world of myth begins to lean toward the age of wise rulers, where guidance comes not from fear, but from virtue. The waters continue their quiet journey toward the sea, and along their banks, the first signs of a new order begin to take shape, like distant lanterns appearing one by one in the gathering dusk. They begin to glow more steadily. And those lanterns seem to take the shape of people, quiet figures who walk beneath a wide sky and guide the land not with commands, but with example. From the softened valleys shaped by water and patience, the world drifts gently into an age remembered as the time of sage kings, where order grows not from fear, but from virtue, and where leadership feels as calm and steady as a slow-flowing river. They spoke of rulers whose presence did not weigh heavily upon the people. Instead, their authority rested like morning light on fields of grain felt, trusted, almost invisible in its touch. Among these figures, 3 names appear again and again in the memory of tradition: Yao, Shun, and Yu. They are not described as distant or harsh. Instead, they seem woven into the land itself, moving with the seasons, listening to the wind, and shaping the world through patience. The stories say that Yao lived during a time when the horizon stretched wide and uncluttered, when the settlements were small and the sky felt close to the earth. The air in these tales is quiet, full of long afternoons and slow evenings. Yao is remembered as a ruler who did not cling to power, who valued harmony above pride, who believed that the world could be guided by goodness rather than force. He is often described as modest, a man whose robes may have been plain, whose speech was measured, whose thoughts always turned toward the well-being of others. In later texts, like the Book of Documents, one of the earliest collections of prose in Chinese history, Yao's name appears not as a mythic giant, but as a moral example, a model for rulers who would come after. The stories surrounding him echo the values of early Chinese political thought, that leadership is a responsibility, not a prize, that a ruler must mirror the balance of heaven and earth, and remain steady even when the world is uncertain. Evening light settles slowly in these tales. You can almost imagine the soft warmth of a fire flickering against the walls of a hall built from wood and earth, shadows drifting along smooth floors while advisors speak in calm tones. Beyond the doorway, the fields lie quiet under a pale sky. The wind carries the smell of soil and distant riverbanks. Nothing seems hurried. Decisions arrive slowly, like footsteps across stone. Yet even in this calm, the world is never still. The land changes, people move, seasons shift. Yao, sensing the passage of time, looks for someone worthy to continue the work, not someone of blood alone, but someone of heart. In the legend he finds Shun, a man of extraordinary patience and kindness, whose life before leadership is marked not by comfort, but by hardship endured without bitterness. Shun is remembered as a man who lives simply, who plows fields and repairs roofs, who treats his family with care even when they treat him poorly. The myth is not loud about his suffering. It does not dwell on cruelty. Instead, it focuses on the quiet strength with which he persists, a strength rooted in dignity rather than resentment. His character becomes the reason he is chosen, and through that choice, the story speaks gently about the meaning of worth. There is a sense of stillness around Shun's rise to leadership. No drums, no shouting crowds, only the soft rustle of reeds along the river, the sound of tools placed carefully on the ground, the distant call of birds across open fields. He does not seize power. It is given to him because he has already learned how to guide himself. In this time, the mandate of heaven begins to take shape as an idea, not as thunder or lightning, but as a moral presence that settles over the land like a quiet light. Heaven in these stories is not far above the world. It feels near, like a breath across the hills, like the balance of day and night. The mandate does not guarantee a throne. It rests upon virtue, and it can be lost if a ruler forgets compassion or falls into cruelty. Power is temporary, but goodness can endure. The mandate becomes less a law and more a reminder. Rulers exist for the people, not the other way around. Shun continues the patient work begun before him. He listens to advisors, walks the land, and keeps close to the rhythms of nature. The world around him feels calm not because there is no hardship, but because hardship is met with understanding rather than force. When the time comes, he does what Yao once did. He looks beyond himself, searching for someone whose character can carry the world forward. He chooses you, the same you who once walked through flooded valleys, guiding waters with open channels rather than resisting them with walls. The story of the flood now blends with the story of rulership. The patience you learned from water becomes the patience he brings into governance. He does not forget the land, he remains close to it, as if every decision must still be tested against the movement of rivers and the quiet sigh of earth after rain. The myth lingers on this connection between nature and authority. A good ruler watches the seasons, honors the cycles of planting and harvest, and understands that people, like rivers, cannot be forced without consequence. Leadership becomes an extension of listening to the land, to the sky, to the unspoken needs of the people who live beneath both. In the softness of this storytelling, you might imagine an early capital built from timber and packed soil, standing on a rise above a river valley. Smoke lifts gently from the rooftops at dusk. The air smells faintly of cooked grain and damp grass. Lanterns glow along a pathway, scattering warm light across stone steps worn by many feet. Inside a quiet hall, Yu considers matters of the realm not through calculation alone, but through a sense of responsibility that feels almost personal. The legends surrounding these kings were retold for centuries, shaping how later dynasties understood legitimacy. When the Zhou dynasty rose, they would look back toward this imagined golden age and say that heaven withdraws its favor from unjust rulers and grants it to those who act with virtue. The mandate became a thread connecting myth, memory, and political philosophy, a bridge between belief and governance. There is reflection here, gentle and human. Just as rivers obey gravity and seasons follow one another across the sky, people seek leaders who allow them to live without fear, who see them not as tools, but as lives with hopes and quiet struggles. The myth suggests that a just ruler is like a caretaker walking through a sleeping village at night, ensuring that every lamp stays lit, every doorway remains safe, every household can rest. The atmosphere in these tales is rarely loud or triumphant. Instead, the age of the sage kings feels like a long, peaceful evening stretched across the land. Farmers return from the fields and sit near their doorways, dust on their sleeves, the sound of insects drifting through the air. Children listen to stories beside low fires. In the distance, mountains fade into shadow, steady and unmoving like guardians of time. And yet, beneath the quiet, there is always movement, the slow current of thought, the deepening of ideas that will eventually turn towards something broader than kings or borders. Those who watch the world begin to ask not only how to rule well, but how to live well. They turn their gaze inward, toward the spirit, toward the unseen order within the universe itself. The memory of Yao, Shun, and Yu becomes something more than biography. It becomes a mirror in which people see their own lives reflected. The lessons of patience, humility, and harmony stretch beyond palaces or halls. They reach into fields, markets, and mountainside paths, suggesting that wisdom is not limited to those who wear crowns. It rests wherever someone chooses kindness over pride and balance over excess. As the age of the sage kings gently fades into the distance of memory, the night sky above the land seems wider than before. The stars hang like quiet marks of possibility. The wind carries a softer tone, as if the world itself is ready to explore a deeper kind of understanding, one not bound to thrones or titles, but to the subtle rhythms of existence. Along the ridges of distant mountains, mist begins to gather, drifting slowly between pines and stone, and in that pale and silent haze, a different kind of path waits, leading away from courts and cities and toward a quieter realm where seekers walk, where immortals are whispered about, and where the unseen way flows like a hidden stream through the heart of the world. And that hidden stream through the heart of the world widens gently, turning into mist that drifts along mountain slopes where peaks rise and disappear again inside pale clouds. The world feels quieter here, farther from the halls of rulers and the rhythms of fields. The air thins, the wind slows. Paths narrow into stony trails that curl around cliffs and vanish into valleys where few people walk. In this stillness, stories begin to speak not of kings or flood-taming heroes, but of seekers who turn inward, listening for something softer than power and deeper than law, the subtle current they called the Tao. The mountains in these tales do not feel harsh or forbidding. They breathe with a patient calm, as if time itself moves differently among pines and distant ravines. You might imagine morning light settling across moss-covered rocks, dew clinging to the edges of leaves, a faint scent of resin carried by cool air. Somewhere along a ledge, a narrow hut of wood and stone leans into the slope, smoke rising quietly from a small fire inside. A lone figure sits at its threshold, watching clouds drift between the peaks, as though the sky and the earth are learning to share the same space. These figures are not lords of thunder or conquerors of worlds. They are sages, hermits, and wanderers who leave behind the noise of court and market to study the rhythms of nature. In legend, some of them eventually become Xian immortals, though the word does not mean immortality in the simple sense of endless life. It suggests transformation, refinement, a state where spirit and body move into harmony with the great unfolding of the cosmos. The deeper the traveler listens, the closer they come to that balance. The roots of these stories stretch toward early Taoist thought, found in texts like the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi, preserved and copied through centuries. These writings do not shout their ideas. They speak in quiet images, water flowing downward without resistance, trees bending in the wind instead of breaking, people living gently by doing less rather than more. They offer a philosophy grounded in observation, shaped by patience, and carried by a sense that the world does not need to be conquered to be understood. In the legends, immortals do not dwell in shining palaces high above the world. They inhabit mountain forests, hidden caves, drifting clouds. Some are described as old men with bright, watchful eyes. Others appear as women with calm expressions and steady hands, walking through bamboo groves, as if the leaves themselves lean to hear their footsteps. They are neither fully divine nor entirely human. They stand somewhere in between, shaped by discipline, meditation, and a long devotion to stillness. The atmosphere of these tales feels hushed. Even when miracles occur, they arrive gently, as if the world reveals itself without hurry. A traveler may climb for days through fog and rock before reaching a plateau where a single apricot tree grows beside a clear spring. There, a figure might sit in silence, dipping a cup into the water with an unhurried motion, offering nothing more than a nod of greeting. The traveler may speak, ask questions, search for secrets, but the sage answers through small gestures, inviting the visitor to notice the wind, the shape of the valley, the curve of water around stone. Immortality, in stories like these, is not a reward for ambition. It is a state of harmony. Those who chase it too eagerly are often said to miss it entirely. The legend suggests that the path does not open through force, but through letting go, giving up the need to control, allowing the world to move as it must. In this way, the myths echo earlier lessons from the flood. Water is not mastered by resisting it, but by learning to move with its flow. A historical thread runs quietly beneath the mythic landscape. Across China, real mountains, such as Mount Tai, Mount Hua, and Mount Heng, became sites of pilgrimage and spiritual retreat. People carved monasteries into cliffs, built temples along ridges, and left inscriptions in stone that recorded prayers, poems, and meditations. Scholars and hermits alike traveled to such places seeking clarity, and from their journeys, memories blended with imagination, until the mountains themselves felt like thresholds between the mortal world and something more enduring. In many tales, the immortals are not remote beings who ignore humanity. They appear briefly among people, guiding gently rather than commanding. One story might tell of an elderly traveler who stays overnight in a small village, sharing a calm word or a simple gesture that helps a farmer face hardship with renewed patience. Only after the traveler disappears into morning mist do villagers realize they may have been visited by someone who walks the edge between worlds. The miracle is rarely flashy. It is found in understanding, in renewed balance, in the quiet courage to continue. These stories often speak about the body as much as the spirit. Breathing, movement, diet, and discipline become part of the path toward harmony. The idea is not to escape the human form, but to refine it, to live in a way that honors its rhythms and limits. The myth suggests that immortality is less about endless time and more about depth, about living in such alignment with the Tao that each moment feels whole. Even so, the tales occasionally smile at human longing. Somewhere in the mountains, a would-be disciple might climb eagerly, convinced that immortality can be achieved in a week or two if one just tries hard enough. A patient sage listens, pours tea, and quietly lets the enthusiasm calm itself, like boiling water cooling in an open cup. The humor is gentle, more affectionate than mocking, as if the story understands how deeply people hope to outrun time, even while teaching that peace is found through acceptance rather than escape. The Tao itself is never described as an object or a place. It is a principle, a flow, a pattern present in the curve of a river, the arc of the moon, the growth of bamboo, the rise and fall of breath. You cannot hold it, but you can feel it. You cannot command it, but you can follow it. In these stories, the immortals are simply those who have learned to move with it so completely that they no longer feel separate from the world around them. Night often falls softly in these tales. A hermit sits beside a narrow cliff path, a small lantern burning near his feet. The mountains stretch outward like great shadows layered against a grey-blue sky. The sound of insects hums in the dark, steady and low. A bowl of rice cools beside him, untouched for a long while as he watches the horizon. Nothing spectacular happens. Yet in that stillness, the story suggests that something profound is taking place, a deep settling of the spirit, a quiet turning toward truth. The immortals are sometimes depicted as traveling together, gathering at remote peaks to share wine brewed from mountain flowers or fruit grown in hidden orchards. These meetings are not filled with ceremony or hierarchy. They feel more like friends resting after a long journey, speaking softly about the passage of seasons and the nature of change. The world below continues as always. Fields are planted, markets open, rivers run through valleys. Yet above, in these secluded places, time feels lighter, as if it has loosened its grip. There is a sense, too, that immortality is not limited to the solitary path. Some tales tell of artisans, healers, or poets who achieve a similar harmony while living among people, simply by working with care and intention. The myth whispers that the border between ordinary life and spiritual refinement is thinner than it appears. One does not need to vanish into the mountains to sense the Tao. It is present in the turning of a potter's wheel, the steady stitching of cloth, the careful tending of a garden at dusk. Still, the mountains remain symbols of clarity. They rise beyond the noise of cities and the burdens of court, offering a place where thoughts slow and the heart finds space to listen. The air tastes clean. Pine needles crunch underfoot. The sound of distant water echoes through narrow valleys. In that environment, the legends say, the world begins to reveal itself not as something to be shaped, but as something to be shared. The myths also describe immortals as protectors of landscapes, guardians of forests, rivers, or ancient stones worn smooth by countless years. They do not rule those places, they watch over them. When storms pass and landslides break the sides of mountains, they guide travelers towards safer paths. When drought lingers, they appear in quiet dreams, reminding communities to care for springs and shade the roots of trees. The stories speak of harmony not only between people and the Tao, but between people and the living world around them. In these quiet narratives, Wisdom does not shout from mountaintops. It unfolds gently, like fog lifting at dawn. The listener is invited to look inward, to notice breath and heartbeat, to recognize that the same patterns found in rivers and clouds move within the human spirit. The Immortals become symbols of what is possible when life is lived without forcing, without grasping too tightly, without pushing against the grain of the universe. As the night deepens across those high ridges, stars appear above the peaks, scattered and calm. The wind brushes against stone and cedar. Somewhere, a small bell rings from a distant temple, its sound drifting slowly into the vastness. A sage closes their eyes, not in withdrawal, but in awareness, feeling the world flow through them like water through a channel shaped with care. And from that quiet realm of mountains, mist, and wandering spirits, the tales begin to lean outward again toward valleys, where dragons slide through hidden rivers, and spirits watch over forests, where the living world itself seems to breathe with intention, and where every mountain, every stream, every drifting cloud carries the memory of a world that is not separate from humanity, but alive beside it, waiting softly at the edge of sight. Rivers in these stories do not simply cross the landscape as lines of water. They move with intention, with memory, and with presence, and so they are spoken of as dragons that lie across the valleys and coil between mountains. A river may nourish a field, shape a village, or sweep away a careless traveler, and because of this power, people walk beside it with respect. The currents seem to breathe, and the mist that lifts from the surface at dawn feels like a quiet voice rising from the world itself. In such a setting, nature is not an empty stage on which life happens, but a living world that responds, remembers, and participates in every story that unfolds. Across the plains, farmers step into the fields before sunrise. Their tools are simple, their movements deliberate, and every gesture carries a sense of relationship with the soil beneath their feet. The earth is not treated as a resource to be taken from, but as a companion that must be tended. When the planting is finished, they bow lightly toward the ridge where the mountains begin, acknowledging the unseen guardians who watch from the peaks. The wind moves through the crops in long waves, and it feels less like weather and more like the land answering back. In old traditions, spirits are not locked away in distant heavens. They live close at hand, gathered in stones, trees, rivers, and paths. A traveler moving through a forest does not presume to be alone. He walks with patience, staying quiet where the branches meet overhead, and offering a small word of courtesy before crossing a stream or resting beneath an ancient tree. These gestures are not born from fear, but from recognition. To ignore the presence of the unseen would be to misunderstand the world itself. Villages mark their boundaries with small shrines. These structures are humble, built from wood or stone, their roofs gently curved to shelter offerings of food, incense, and water. They are reminders that the space between the human and the natural world is thin and permeable. When storms approach, families place a cup of wine beneath the eaves and whisper a short request to the spirits of wind and rain, asking for gentleness. When the clouds part and the fields remain unharmed, gratitude follows, not as spectacle, but as a steady habit woven into daily life. Dragons in these traditions do not hoard treasure or guard lonely caves. They rise with the clouds, descend with the rain, and travel across the sky as shimmering arcs of movement. Some dwell in deep waters, their bodies stretching across submerged valleys and hidden springs. Others are said to coil within mountain ranges, shaping the very backbone of the land. To speak of a dragon is to speak of energy, motion, and the unbroken chain between heaven and earth. They are symbols not of violence, but of vitality, balance, and transformation. In the capital cities of later ages, scholars study maps and trace the flow of energy across regions as if tracing the movements of unseen dragons. Hills and rivers are read not only for geography, but for harmony. A well-placed village is one that rests within the gentle curve of the land, aligned with currents that cannot be seen yet are believed to shape fortune and stability. Houses turn toward favorable directions, bridges arch like the backs of resting serpents, and gardens are arranged so that paths meander rather than cut sharply through space. The result is a landscape that feels guided rather than imposed upon. Forests hold their own communities of spirits. In certain tales, foxes watch from the shadows, intelligent and curious, testing the intentions of those who pass. They are not merely animals, but beings who can cross the threshold between human and otherworldly realms. Travelers tell stories of hearing footsteps behind them where no person walks, or seeing lantern-like lights drifting between the trees at night. These experiences are not treated as threats, but as reminders that the world is layered, and that understanding it requires humility. Mountains rise in silence, their slopes wrapped in clouds and their cliffs marked by narrow paths that climb towards solitary temples. Monks and hermits live there in small dwellings, shaped by stone and wood, placed so that they neither dominate nor disturb the terrain. From these heights, valleys stretch outward like open hands, and rivers glitter as thin lines of light far below. The monks say that the mountains themselves breathe. When fog gathers in the ravines and lifts through the trees, it feels as if the peaks are exhaling. In the evenings, villagers gather near the edges of fields or along the banks of streams. Elders tell stories of spirits who guard bridges, guide travelers through storms, or watch over households in silence. Children listen carefully, sensing that these tales are not simply inventions. Instead, they are instructions on how to live with awareness. To show respect to the unseen is to live with care for the visible world as well, for the trees that shelter birds, the soil that grows food, and the waters that sustain entire communities. The bond between humans and nature is reinforced through rituals tied to the seasons. In spring, offerings are placed near wells and riverbanks, asking for clean waters and steady growth. In summer, dances and gatherings honor the warmth that ripens crops. Autumn brings ceremonies of gratitude, marked by shared meals and simple music. In winter, when the land rests, people speak quietly of ancestors and the spirits who remain close during the long, cold nights. Through each season, the rhythm of the world and the rhythm of human life remain intertwined. Even cities, with their walls, markets, and busy streets, are never imagined as separate from the living world. Gardens are built within courtyards, ponds reflect sky and stone, and carefully placed trees soften the passage of time. Scholars pause beneath willows to think, poets sit beside streams to write, and families leave small offerings at shrines near gates and crossroads. The city breathes, not despite the presence of nature, but because nature has been invited to remain within it. The idea that the world is alive encourages restraint. Instead of conquering mountains, people climb with patience. Instead of bending rivers into harsh lines, they guide them gently. Instead of clearing forests completely, they leave pockets of growth untouched, recognizing that unseen guardians may dwell there. This attitude is not presented as superstition or fear, but as wisdom born from centuries of observation. When the land is pushed too hard, it responds with imbalance. When it is treated as a partner, it sustains life with generosity. Legends also describe times when harmony is broken. A careless ruler drains wetlands, cuts forests without thought, or digs deeply into sacred hills, and soon storms grow harsher, rivers overflow, or drought spreads across the plains. In these stories, disaster is not punishment from a distant deity, but an echo of disrupted balance. The lesson travels quietly through generations. To live well is to live in cooperation with forces larger than oneself. Along the coast, fishermen watch the sea with the same awareness that farmers bring to fields. Before launching their boats, they bow toward the horizon, asking permission to enter the waters. They speak of dragons beneath the waves and spirits that move with the tides. When storms rise suddenly and the sky darkens, they read the shifting patterns of wind and spray as if reading a living script. Survival depends on attention, and attention deepens respect. Rainfalls, earthquakes, and shifting seasons are never seen as meaningless events. They are messages from a world that is constantly shaping and reshaping itself. People respond not by imagining that they stand above nature, but by accepting that they exist within it. In this understanding lies a quiet sense of belonging. Every life, whether human, animal, or unseen, shares space within the same vast, breathing landscape. Through these stories and practices, a way of seeing emerges. The world is not divided into sacred and ordinary places. The sacred is present everywhere, in mountain ridges shaped like the long spines of hidden dragons, in forests where spirits linger near roots and streams, and in the air that carries the scent of rain across distant fields. To live in such a world is to walk carefully, to listen closely, and to recognize that every step touches something alive. In this vision, humans are not masters of nature, nor are they insignificant. They are participants in a living network that stretches across land, water, sky, and spirit. Dragons glide through clouds, fox spirits watch from hillsides, rivers move with ancient memory, and trees hold quiet strength in their branches. The landscape is not a backdrop to human history. It is a companion patient, powerful, and always present, shaping every story as it unfolds. High on the distant heights of Kunlun, the world seems to widen rather than narrow. The air is thin and clear, and each breath carries the feeling that time itself has slowed to a patient rhythm. Paths wind upward through pale stone terraces, and clouds gather below the peaks instead of above them, so that the mountains appear to float upon a soft white sea. Travelers who reach these heights do not speak loudly. They move with quiet steps, aware that they are entering a realm where ordinary measures of distance and time no longer apply. It is here, on these elevated slopes, that the Queen Mother of the West is said to live, tending her orchard with calm, unhurried care. Her dwelling is not described as a palace of glittering wealth or imposing towers. Instead, it rests in harmony with the mountains themselves, shaped from stone, wood, and sky. Terraces open toward distant horizons. Walkways curve gently along ridges. A steady wind passes through open courtyards, bringing with it the scent of fruit and the faint rustle of leaves. Those who approach do not come as conquerors or petitioners. They come as guests, invited into a place where immortality is cultivated not as a prize, but as a patient relationship with time. The Queen Mother of the West is ancient, yet not stern. She is often described as composed, alert, and fully present, as though she holds the weight of centuries without being burdened by them. She watches the world below with a gaze neither distant nor detached, but thoughtful. Her authority does not rest in armies or laws. It rests in endurance, wisdom, and the quiet order of her orchard. Legends speak of her as a guardian of balance, a keeper of secrets that link heaven, earth, and the deeper mysteries of existence. Around her home stretches the orchard of the peaches of immortality. The trees stand widely spaced, their trunks firm and their branches spreading in graceful arcs. Their leaves shimmer faintly in the sunlight, and the fruit that hangs from them is pale at first, then deepens in color as the years pass. These peaches do not ripen according to human seasons. Some may take decades to mature, others may take centuries. Their growth is measured not by urgency, but by cycles that mirror the vast rhythms of the universe itself. The orchard is a place of stillness. When the wind moves through it, the sound is soft and steady, like breathing. Garden paths curve between rows of trees, and the ground beneath is covered with fine moss and fallen petals. There is no rush to harvest. The Queen Mother walks among the trees, observing their slow development, adjusting supports, tending to branches, and watching over blossoms that may not bear fruit within a human lifetime. In this careful attention lies the heart of the orchard's meaning. Immortality is not a sudden gift, but a process that unfolds with patience. In many stories, immortals and honored guests are invited to her great banquets when the peaches finally ripen. Messengers carry word across distant realms, and sages, spirits, and celestial beings make the long journey to Kunlun. They arrive not to celebrate power, but to witness the turning of a rare and profound moment. When the peaches are gathered, they are placed on carved trays and brought to a hall open to the sky. The gathering is quiet rather than extravagant. Words are thoughtful, laughter is measured, and each guest understands the significance of what is being shared. The peaches themselves are described not as glittering or supernatural in appearance, but as simple and luminous, firm yet delicate, with a fragrance that suggests something larger than flavor alone. To taste one is to feel time loosen its grip. The body becomes lighter, the mind steadier, and the sense of passing years shifts into something broad and expansive. The gift is not invulnerability or endless youth, but continuity, the ability to belong across ages without being torn apart by change. Mortals rarely encounter such fruit directly. In some tales, a wandering traveler, a scholar seeking wisdom, or a ruler burdened by responsibility might dream of Kunlun and awaken with a quiet longing rather than possession. The stories do not promise that every seeker will taste immortality. Instead, they reflect a different lesson, that the worth of the journey lies not only in reaching the orchard, but in understanding why immortality is guarded so carefully. It is not meant to reward ambition, but to deepen reverence for life itself. The Queen Mother does not hoard her peaches out of greed. She protects them because they represent a fragile harmony, a balance between heaven and earth, between desire and restraint. Immortality, given carelessly, would unravel the natural rhythms that hold the world together. Seasons would lose meaning, lessons would lose urgency, and the quiet wisdom that grows from impermanence would fade. By tending her orchard deliberately and sharing its fruit only in rare moments, she preserves both the mystery and the integrity of time. In some traditions, rulers and heroes seek her counsel rather than her peaches. They climb the mountain not to escape mortality, but to ask how to govern, how to endure hardship, or how to carry responsibility without being consumed by it. The Queen Mother listens and replies with clarity, reminding them that strength is found not in domination, but in alignment with deeper patterns. A wise ruler, like a careful gardener, nurtures growth rather than forcing it. A strong society, like a healthy orchard, flourishes when patience and steadiness guide its development. The orchard also symbolizes resilience. Trees may lose blossoms to storms or suffer broken branches in harsh winds, yet the Queen Mother does not despair or rush to replace what has been lost. She tends, prunes, and waits. Over time, the trees recover, new blossoms form, and the cycle resumes. Through this, the orchard embodies a lesson about endurance. Even in the face of disruption, life continues when guided with calm purpose. Immortality in this sense is not a refusal of change, but a capacity to persist within it. Beyond the cultivated terraces lie wild slopes and distant peaks. The landscape surrounding Kunlun is steep, rugged, and vast, reminding those who see it that immortality exists alongside danger, effort, and humility. The orchard is not a simple escape from the world. It is part of it, anchored in stone and sky. The Queen Mother stands not apart from nature, but within its widest horizons, tending life in a place where the boundary between the mortal realm and the celestial one grows thin. At times, immortals gather not only for feasts, but for conversation. They speak of ancient histories, of cycles of rise and decline, of civilizations that flourish and fade. From the height of Kunlun, the flow of time appears less like a straight line and more like a series of broad, overlapping circles. The Queen Mother listens, offering insight when needed, yet allowing each being to draw meaning from experience. Immortality does not erase uncertainty, it expands the space in which reflection can occur. For those who hear these tales from a distance, the Queen Mother of the West becomes more than a figure of myth. She represents an ideal of balance, a guardian of time, a keeper of patience, a reminder that the deepest forms of power are subtle and restrained. Her peaches symbolize the hope that life can continue, that memory can endure, and that wisdom can accumulate gently across generations. In villages and cities far from Kunlun, people repeat stories of her orchard during gatherings and winter nights. They do not expect to climb the mountain themselves, yet the image of slowly ripening peaches shapes how they understand their own lives. It suggests that some things cannot be hurried, that relationships, communities, and knowledge develop through steady care rather than force. The orchard becomes a quiet metaphor for responsibility, continuity, and trust in long cycles. The Queen Mother's realm also reflects a broader theme within these traditions, the idea that immortality is meaningful only when grounded in harmony. A life that stretches beyond ordinary years matters little if it is empty of purpose or severed from the world. By tending an orchard instead of ruling an empire, the Queen Mother shows that the greatest legacies may come from nurturing rather than conquering, from sustaining rather than accumulating. As the sun lowers across Kunlun, the light turns soft and even, shadows lengthen between the trees, and the leaves take on a gentle glow. The Queen Mother walks once more among the branches, pausing to observe a blossom, a fold of bark, or a peach still firm and unready. She does not hurry it. She understands that each fruit has its own path to ripeness, just as each life has its own rhythm of growth and understanding. Night settles slowly over the mountains. Stars appear above the peaks, wide and clear, stretching across the sky like a calm, unbroken field. The orchard rests, and the world below continues its restless motion of seasons, births, triumphs, and losses. From her high vantage point, the Queen Mother remains watchful, not as a distant ruler, but as a steady presence, preserving a space where time moves in wider circles and where the promise of continuation is kept with care. In this vision, immortality is not an escape from life, but a deepening of it. The peaches of Kunlun do not erase change, they reveal its place within a larger pattern. The Queen Mother of the West tends that pattern with patient devotion, reminding all who hear her story that wisdom grows slowly, endurance requires gentleness, and the greatest treasures ripen only when given time. And from that quiet patience, the heavens themselves seem to take their shape, unfolding not as a storm of fire or a throne of absolute command, but as a vast and measured palace of order. Above the mountains, beyond the drifting clouds and the slow-turning constellations, the celestial world is imagined as a reflection of the world below, a place where halls stretch wide and corridors run straight, where every star has its position and every spirit its role, and where even the wind appears to move according to a gentle, deliberate rhythm. In this realm, the sky is not empty space. It is a city of pale light, arranged with careful symmetry. There are courts, offices, terraces open to distant horizons, and towers that rise like calm markers of direction. Lanterns glow softly along balconies. The sound of footsteps across stone is faint yet steady, as celestial officials pass from one chamber to another with scrolls tucked beneath their sleeves. Nothing here is hurried. Nothing erupts in sudden judgment or fury. The heavens operate the way a great river flows, guided by channels, turning where the banks allow, trusting in structure rather than force. At the center of this ordered expanse stands the figure known as the Jade Emperor. He is not imagined as a warrior brandishing weapons or as a god thundering above mortals in anger. Instead, he is a ruler of presence seated in quiet authority, listening, considering, and maintaining harmony across the countless realms below. His court gathers around him in layers of responsibility. Messengers arrive from the edges of mountains, from villages and oceans, from temples and cities, carrying reports of human affairs and natural events. Their voices remain low, their movements are respectful. The atmosphere of the heavenly palace is one of discipline and calm. The idea of such a celestial bureaucracy did not emerge from nowhere. It echoes the structures of real courts and governments that once shaped life across ancient China. Historians describe how imperial administrations organized officials into ranks and offices, each with defined duties, responsibilities, and rituals. Records were kept, reports were submitted. Decisions were weighed with care. Over time, these earthly systems helped inspire stories in which the heavens themselves followed a similar design, turning rule into a form of order rather than personal will. The Jade Emperor, in this sense, becomes less a figure of unpredictable power and more a symbol of stability. Within the celestial offices, spirits are assigned to watch over rivers, forests, winds, and households. There are guardians of bridges, mountains, city walls, and distant valleys. Some oversee stars and constellations, guiding their seasonal movements. Others observe the actions of communities, not to condemn them immediately, but to understand how choices ripple outward like circles across still water. Each official has a purpose. Each purpose contributes to balance. Even misfortune, when it appears, is interpreted as a sign that harmony has weakened somewhere along the chain of relationships. The halls are filled with soft, persistent sounds, the faint rustle of silk robes, the quiet brush of ink on scrolls, the low murmur of deliberation. Outside the palace walls, clouds drift in slow layers, colored by distant sunlight. Celestial bridges arc across open space, and on them, messengers move with the same careful pace as clerks in a court archive. You can almost imagine standing there for a moment, feeling the stillness of high air, hearing nothing harsh or sudden, only the steady rhythm of eternal administration. In many stories, the Jade Emperor is not the origin of creation, but its steward. He steps into a world already formed, already filled with spirits, myths, and ancient powers. His task is to coordinate rather than dominate, to organize rather than erase. He listens to reports from dragons guarding the seas, from spirits of harvest and rain, from wandering immortals who have seen distant lands. Decisions are made after reflection, not impulse. Punishment, when it appears, is slow and measured, meant to restore balance rather than to break it. This vision of heaven mirrors a way of thinking about responsibility. Just as rulers on earth were expected to govern through virtue and restraint, the Jade Emperor embodies the idea that true authority emerges from patience and fairness. The mandate of heaven, once spoken of in the age of sage kings, appears here in another form, a reminder that cosmic order rests not on fear, but on moral alignment. If harmony falters, even the highest seat in the celestial court must remain attentive and humble. From time to time, celestial officials descend to observe affairs more closely, not as blazing miracles, but as gentle presences moving quietly through markets, fields, and forests. The stories describe them taking note of kindness and cruelty alike, of moments of compassion that pass unnoticed by the world. In their reports, small gestures matter: a shared bowl of grain in winter, a repaired footbridge after a flood, a promise kept when no one was watching. These details, too, are part of the cosmic record, as meaningful as any great victory or loss. Inside the palace, seasons do not rush, yet change is still acknowledged. Festivals mark the passage of cosmic cycles. Bells are struck with soft tones that linger in the air. The light through the high windows shifts gradually through pale gold, faint blue, and quiet grey. Time is recorded in long scrolls that stretch across tables, tied carefully and placed in rows. The heavens, like the world below, move through rhythms of renewal, But instead of harvests and snowfalls, they measure the slow balance of destinies and decisions. There is a sense of distance here, but not coldness. The celestial officials are not meant to be perfect beings beyond all feeling. They are imagined as thoughtful, aware of the weight of choice, and capable of uncertainty. Some legends even tell of disputes in the heavenly court, not violent quarrels, but disagreements over how best to guide the world. Voices rise slightly, then quiet again. The conversation continues until a calm resolution emerges, like clouds parting after a long, patient discussion. The Jade Emperor remains at the center of these moments, not isolated but steady. He listens, pauses, and speaks with clarity. His words are not commands shouted across the sky. They are more like carefully placed stones across a river guidance that allows others to step forward without falling. His strength lies in restraint, in the ability to hold the vastness of heaven and earth together without pressing too hard upon either. Outside the palace, the constellations wheel through open space, tracing paths known for generations. Farmers on distant fields look upward and mark the seasons by their positions. Sailors on quiet waters read direction from their patterns. In this way, the heavens above and the lives below remain connected through motion and memory. The celestial bureaucracy does not dominate human existence. It accompanies it, providing a frame in which meaning can be found. A soft reflection lingers in these stories that order itself can be comforting. In a world of floods, droughts, migrations, and change, the image of a steady court in the sky suggests that nothing is entirely lost to chaos. Someone is listening, someone is keeping record. Even when events feel overwhelming, they are woven into a larger pattern, observed by patient eyes that do not rush to judgment. The thought does not eliminate hardship, but it offers a quiet sense of companionship across the distance between earth and heaven. From the terraces of the Jade Emperor's palace, one might imagine the world below as a vast tapestry, rivers gleaming like threads of silver, mountains rising in folded layers, villages glowing faintly in evening light. Celestial officials lean over railings and watch the slow sweep of clouds across plains and seas. They do not interfere at every turn. They wait, they measure, they trust the natural course of things, stepping in only when balance strains beyond endurance. The atmosphere of this realm carries discipline but also serenity. Paper screens slide open without sound. Incense burns slowly along stone altars, its smoke curling upward in thin lines that seem to merge with the air itself. Beyond the walls, cranes stand motionless on the edges of celestial ponds, their reflections trembling lightly across the surface. Everything here conveys continuity, the sense that existence unfolds with structure, that time is not an enemy, but a patient companion. And yet, within this great stillness, stories also tell of moments when heaven must look outward toward the wandering figures who move between worlds, toward the archers, travelers, tricksters, and seekers who do not remain inside ordered halls. For as the scrolls are tied and stored, and as the bells of the celestial court fade into evening, a quiet doorway seems to open at the far edge of the sky, leading outward toward distant roads, where footsteps begin to echo softly into the unknown. And from that doorway, when the time was ripe, stepped a figure whose footsteps did not echo softly, but shook the very foundations of the orderly world. He was not a weary traveler seeking wisdom, but a burst of unchecked will born from stone itself, son Wukong, the Monkey King, whose rebellion would become the loudest echo ever to resound through the silent halls of heaven. His beginning did not follow the pattern of noble birth or ancestral line. Instead, he emerged from a great stone egg formed on a mountain peak, shaped by wind, rain, and the steady turning of time. When the egg split open, a creature leapt into life with eyes that flashed like twin bolts of lightning. The world did not whisper his arrival, it reacted to it. The rivers trembled, spirits paused, and the sky seemed to recognize that something unpredictable had entered the cycle. The newborn monkey did not remain an outcast. He joined a community of wild companions who lived among forests, cliffs, and waterfalls. They crowned him their king not by blood but by courage, daring, and vitality. He led with exuberance rather than restraint, and for a time his world consisted only of joy, companionship, and the thrill of life without boundaries. But beneath his laughter lay a question that refused to leave him. Why must life end? Why must even the strongest eventually fall into silence? That question burned brighter than his triumphs, turning restlessness into a quest. When he learned that only immortals escaped the reach of death, he left his mountain kingdom, trading comfort for search, and began a long journey beyond the familiar world. His path brought him to a hidden master, the immortal patriarch, who lived far from noise and distraction. There, the monkey listened, trained, and adapted, though his nature resisted discipline even as his skills grew. In that quiet place, he received not only techniques of transformation and movement through the clouds, but also something deeper, a name. Son Wukong, awakened to emptiness. The name carried a lesson he did not yet understand. He heard the words, but his pride favored strength over insight. With new power, he felt not humility but exhilaration, and soon he returned to his mountain, eager to test both his abilities and his place in the world. What followed was not peaceful rule but expanding confidence. When he realized that weapons of ordinary iron no longer suited him, he traveled to the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea and demanded a weapon worthy of his strength. What began as a request soon became a challenge. He claimed the great iron pillar that once stabilized the oceans, a staff that could grow, shrink, and obey his will. With it, his identity hardened into defiance. Soon after, he visited the underworld and erased his name from the ledgers of mortality. Death itself, as he saw it, should not apply to him. These acts did not merely display rebellion. They struck at the rules that bound gods, spirits, and mortals alike. Word of his behavior reached heaven, and the celestial order could no longer ignore him. At first, the court of heaven chose accommodation rather than confrontation. The Jade Emperor's officials offered him a position within the celestial hierarchy, a small post meant to contain his energy and turn rebellion into service. Sun Wukong accepted, but when he discovered that the role granted little honor, humiliation fed his anger. He abandoned restraint, declared himself the great sage equal to heaven, and returned to his mountain, carving his title into banners and claiming recognition through force of will rather than permission. What had begun as vitality and independence transformed into open defiance of the cosmic order. From there, the clash deepened. Heaven attempted to bring him back into its structure by granting him another appointment, this time in the stables of the celestial horses. Again, he felt insulted, interpreting the gesture not as compromise but as mockery. He rejected it and escalated his rebellion, storming celestial halls, disrupting formal rituals, and clashing with generals and spirits who represented long-standing discipline and hierarchy. The more heaven tried to contain him, the more his ego expanded. His tricks, transformations, and boundless energy turned every confrontation into a spectacle. To some, he appeared as a playful trickster, exposing the stiffness of heaven's order. To others, he appeared as a symbol of pride without measure, unwilling to accept limits or responsibility. The conflict soon reached its height. Celestial armies marched against him with weapons blazing, summoning warriors, deities, and powerful guardians. Yet Sun Wukong seemed untouchable. His strength was matched by cunning, and his immortality made wounds temporary. He moved through clouds, multiplied his body, and mocked those who attempted to restrain him. In this moment, his rebellion became absolute, not just against officials or positions, but against the very structure of authority, tradition, and cosmic balance. His triumphs made his isolation greater, He stood alone, victorious, but unable to see the limits closing around him. It was then that a different presence intervened, not a general, not a god of thunder, but the Buddha himself. Instead of weapons, the confrontation unfolded through conversation. The Buddha did not challenge Wukong's strength. He questioned his understanding. He spoke of limits, impermanence, and the illusion of control. To Sun Wukong, these sounded like veiled threats, not insights. He answered with boldness, boasting that he could go anywhere, break through any barrier, and escape even the Buddha's reach. The Buddha proposed a test. If the Monkey King could leap beyond his palm, he would be acknowledged as victorious. Sun Wukong laughed and accepted, soaring across the cosmos, flying beyond mountains and seas, beyond the edges of heaven itself, or so he believed. He left his mark upon the pillars he found at the edge of space, and returned with confidence, eager to claim his triumph. But when he landed, the Buddha showed him that the pillars had been his own fingers. Wukong had never truly escaped the palm. His victory was only a perception, and his certainty shattered in that instant. The rebellion that once felt limitless suddenly revealed its boundary. Power had carried him far, but wisdom had stopped him completely. With a gentle motion, the Buddha pressed him beneath the mountain of 5 elements, sealing him there not out of cruelty, but as a lesson and a pause. The mountain became both prison and mirror. Beneath it, his strength could not move, and his mind could no longer hide behind constant action. For the first time, Sun Wukong faced stillness. The world continued without him, dynasties rose and fell, forests grew and changed, and the heavens resumed their careful rhythm. 500 years passed, not as punishment alone, but as preparation, opening a space where pride could soften into reflection, and rebellion could transform into potential for something deeper. This was not the end of his story. It was a turning point held in silence. The Monkey King did not vanish. He waited, suspended between who he had been and who he would one day become. That long pause formed the bridge between rebellion and redemption, between raw defiance and a future journey defined by protection, loyalty, and discipline. The great noise of his uprising faded into wind across the mountain slopes, but its memory remained a reminder that even the most powerful spirit must eventually face the limits of self-will. In this quiet aftermath, the heavens no longer trembled, the celestial court restored its order, and the world resumed its cycles with renewed steadiness. The Monkey King's challenge had tested the system, exposed its rigidity, and demanded adaptation, yet it had also revealed the cost of unchecked ego. His rebellion became a story not simply about power opposing hierarchy, but about the long path from impulse toward understanding. The mountain above him stood as a symbol of boundary and patience, and the centuries that followed prepared the world for his eventual return when the time would call him again. For now, his chapter closes not in triumph and not in ruin, but in stillness. The echoes of his laughter and defiance drift quietly into the distance, and the wheel of myth turns toward other figures, wanderers who walk softly, seekers who learn through humility rather than upheaval. Where his footsteps once shook the heavens, the next stories unfold with quieter tones, reminding us that not all heroes challenge the world by force. Some move gently through it, and their journeys begin where his thunder finally settles into silence. And along those roads walk travelers and heroes who carry with them courage, longing, and the quiet hope that somewhere beyond the familiar horizon, meaning waits to be found. They move gently at first, their footsteps light upon dusty paths and forest trails, as if aware that every step they take begins to trace a bridge between the world of myth and the world of human memory. In these stories, the journey does not always roar with triumph. It unfolds slowly, like a lantern glow, spreading across a dark field, revealing faces marked not only by strength, but by doubt, tenderness, and the delicate weight of choice. Among these wanderers is an archer whose name echoes across valleys and through the silence of long winter nights. Hou Yi is remembered not simply for his skill with a bow, but for the calm steadiness of his resolve. The world he inhabits is one where the sky once held not one sun, but many 10 blazing orbs rising together, flooding the earth with relentless light. Fields withered, rivers thinned, and mountains baked beneath the heat. People moved in shadows cast by cliffs and caves, seeking refuge wherever the stone remained cool enough to touch. The air shimmered as if the world itself were caught in a long, breathless moment. Hou Yi did not stride forward in anger. He stepped into the open land with careful patience, his bow resting against his shoulder, his gaze steady as he measured the horizon. Legends describe him lifting his face toward the blinding sky, not with rage, but with a sense of burden, the understanding that action once taken cannot be undone. He drew his bowstring slowly. The sound was not terrible or violent, it was taut, focused, something like a soft cord pulled across the stillness of the air. One by one he released his arrows, and the suns fell, until only one remained to warm the earth with a gentler light. What lingers in the story is not victory, but consequence. The world cooled, shadows returned, crops revived. Yet the quiet afterwards carried a feeling of distance, as though the line between human choice and cosmic order had been brushed by mortal hands. Hou Yi became known not only as a savior, but as someone who had stood at the threshold between realms and made a decision whose ripples would never fully fade. He walked the earth afterward not as a triumphant hero, but as a thoughtful figure who understood how easily greatness can turn into solitude. Beside his story, intertwined with it like the curve of a river against a shore, lives the tale of Pangu. Her presence enters the narrative softly, as if she steps forward from a long silver reflection on water. She dwells within the same world of restored balance and quiet evenings, yet her path bends toward the moon, toward distance, longing, and the kind of separation that feels both aching and luminous. In some versions of the tale, an elixir of immortality comes into their lives, a fragile gift meant for careful keeping, something too powerful to rest easily in human hands. Whether taken through necessity, fear, or fate, the elixir leads Pangu upward, away from the earth, rising like a breath released into the night sky. The moon becomes her home, not a cold exile, but a soft, pale refuge where silence gathers gently around her. She is not imagined as triumphant or defeated. She is remembered as yearning, watchful, and enduring, a figure whose presence makes the night feel both distant and familiar. When people look upward at the round fullness of the moon, they do not imagine emptiness. They imagine a story lingering there, a quiet companionship woven through darkness and light. Together, Hou Yi and Pangu form a pair of mirrors. One remains upon the earth, grounded, marked by action and responsibility. The other dwells above, suspended in silver distance, holding memory and longing in equal measure. Their stories are not told as moral absolutes, but as reflections of the human condition itself. Courage mixed with loss, devotion intertwined with separation, love shaped by time and fate. The myth breathes gently beside the listener, reminding them that even in ancient tales, the heart does not move in straight lines. Around these figures gather others travelers who wander beyond the edges of maps, seekers who cross mountains and seas in search of wisdom or escape or a place that finally feels like home. Some carry staffs worn smooth from long roads. Others carry nothing at all but a quiet determination. They pass through villages where fires burn low at night, where elders tell stories on thresholds, and children listen with wide, drowsy eyes. The travelers do not always stay. They move on, leaving behind traces like footprints washed gradually by rain. One such figure might walk into a remote monastery courtyard, where wind slips through bamboo leaves and the sound of distant bells drifts faintly across the stones. He speaks with monks about the nature of fate, smiles at their questions, and offers answers that do not settle easily into simple categories. In these tales, the wanderer becomes something more than human yet never entirely divine, a presence that challenges boundaries, inviting both reflection and humility. The line between hero and trickster grows thin, like mist stretched across a quiet valley. The trickster, especially, moves with a kind of restless brilliance. He laughs softly in the face of rigid structures, not to destroy them, but to reveal their hollowness when they lack compassion. He plays with rules the way a child plays with pebbles in a stream, turning them, testing them, allowing the current to speak for itself. His journey is rarely straight. It bends through heavens and earth, through courts and wilderness alike. In his wake, officials frown, spirits sigh, and yet something loosens. A door opens, a question forms, a stagnant certainty shifts into motion. In later generations, such figures evolve into stories woven through literature and imagination, carrying traces of older myths into new paths of creativity. The wanderer becomes a pilgrim. The trickster becomes a traveler of impossible distances, moving between mountains, oceans, and celestial realms. Companions join him, not perfect saints, but flawed, earnest, and deeply human. Together, they journey not merely to reach a sacred goal, but to uncover the quiet strengths and quiet weaknesses that shape every heart. Their world is still myth, yet now it breathes with storytelling in a new way, one that lingers in the written word as much as in the spoken tale. These stories invite listeners to consider that heroism does not always roar with certainty. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it walks with tired feet and lowered shoulders. Sometimes it hesitates, unsure of where the road leads next, but continues forward anyway. Along mountain passes glazed with frost, across rivers reflecting grey dawn light, along the narrow ridges where clouds press close to the ground, the heroes of these legends carry not only weapons or talismans, but doubts, hopes, regrets, and quiet acts of kindness. Between their journeys, the world around them remains alive. Fields breathe with wind, forests murmur with unseen life, and villages echo with the steady rhythm of everyday existence. When the heroes pass through, they become part of these rhythms for a moment, sharing meals, lending a hand with small tasks, listening to stories spoken by those who will never cross mountains or touch the sky. These brief connections soften the distance between myth and humanity, reminding us that even figures who step beyond the ordinary world still belong to it in countless small ways. And yet, there are moments when the road curves sharply into the extraordinary. A mountain path may open into a hidden valley filled with shimmering stones and quiet lakes where clouds rest upon the surface. A bridge may lead not between two cliffs, but between two realms. A cave may descend into an inner landscape, where echoes sound older than language itself. In these places, heroes confront not monsters or towering dangers, but questions about purpose, loyalty, friendship, and the fragile boundary between freedom and responsibility. The trickster's laughter sometimes returns in such moments, not as mockery, but as a reminder that life contains both gravity and play. Even in solemn journeys, a spark of lightness can help the traveler endure long distances. A misplaced hat, a mistaken pathway, a shared smile in the middle of hardship, these small details become anchors, grounding the myth in human experience. They allow the listener to recognize themselves not in the strength of the hero, but in their uncertainty, in their quiet resilience, in the way they continue forward, even when the end remains unseen. As myths shift into literature, they do not lose their dreamlike quality. Instead, they deepen it. The written word holds space for reflection. It allows journeys to stretch across chapters and time, to layer meaning gently like brushstrokes on silk. The world becomes wider, yet also more personal. The listener or the reader can walk alongside the heroes rather than only watching them from afar. They can pause where the traveler pauses, breathe where the story breathes, and feel the subtle weight of decisions that unfold over distant roads. In these journeys, the boundary between earth and heaven becomes a pathway rather than a wall. Heroes ascend and descend, cross thresholds, learn humility from sages and wisdom from hardship. They return changed, yet still themselves carrying the marks of their travels in the way they speak, the way they move, the way they see the world. The stories suggest that true transformation grows not from power, but from experience, reflection, and the willingness to listen to what lies beyond one's own desires. Sometimes, the travelers do not return at all, at least not in the familiar sense. They may vanish into the mountains, become legends whispered beside fires, or transform into symbols that linger quietly in the imagination. Their absence is not a wound. It becomes a presence of another kind, a reminder that journeys continue even when their paths move beyond our sight. The road remains open. The wind still carries echoes of footsteps that once passed through grass and stone. Through these tales, courage is shown not as conquest, but as endurance. Longing is shown not as weakness, but as depth. Wonder is shown not as escape, but as a way of seeing the world with renewed attention. The heroes and tricksters of these stories remind us that the boundary between myth and life is thin, that every traveler, every seeker, every wandering heart carries a small spark of the same journey within them. As evening settles across the imagined world, the travelers pause along a ridge where the sky opens wide and the horizon curves gently away. Below them, valleys fade into shadow. Above them, faint stars begin to shimmer in a pale, emerging arc. They stand there quietly, neither triumphant nor defeated, simply aware that their paths have led them far from where they began, and that the road ahead continues beyond sight. The wind moves softly across the rocks, and somewhere in the distance, a low, patient silence begins to gather, a silence that does not end the journey, but invites another turning of the path. Another breath, another slow circle of time that waits just beyond the edge of night. The stories of Chinese mythology do not move toward a single ending or collapse into a final conclusion. Instead, they move in long, continuous curves, where endings fold gently into beginnings, and every conclusion quietly prepares the way for what comes next. The world is not imagined as something that began once and will stop once. It is imagined as a living pattern that breathes, rests, and then begins again. In this way, the tales of gods, heroes, spirits, and sages form a cycle, not a straight path, and the listener is invited to recognize how each moment participates in something larger than itself. Creation does not stand apart from the present. It remains ongoing, repeating in small, familiar rhythms across the changing seasons and the passing generations. The first shaping of mountains and rivers echoes in the building of canals, the tending of fields, and the guiding of communities through hardship. The labors of culture heroes continue each time people repair instead of destroy, adapt rather than resist, and search for harmony instead of domination. The mythic past is not locked away behind time. It flows forward, restored and remembered in daily life. The mandate of heaven also follows this cycle. It is not a single blessing granted forever, but a continuing evaluation shaped by ethics, stability, and care for the people. When rulers act with responsibility, the world feels aligned and balanced. When they fail, the balance shifts, and renewal waits to begin again through wiser leadership. Myth and philosophy share this pattern. Authority is never absolute, and renewal remains possible because history is understood as something that can return to virtue after decline. Rise, fall, and restoration become parts of the same living rhythm. The Immortals, too, belong to the cycle rather than escaping it completely. Their long lives are not separations from the world, but patient observations of its recurring motions. They watch dynasties grow and fade, forests sprout and regrow, rivers flood and settle back into their beds. Their presence reminds listeners that longevity does not cancel change. Even those who dwell beyond ordinary years recognize that continuity comes from adjustment, not from freezing time in place. Immortality, in this sense, becomes another way of witnessing the turning wheel. Spirits of mountains, waters, fields, and homes also act within this repeating pattern. They guide growth, warn of imbalance, and respond to respect or neglect. Offerings, rituals, and seasonal customs renew the relationship between humans and the living world. Each year's harvest, each festival, and each moment of remembrance repeats a gesture that connects present communities with their ancestors and with the landscape that sustains them. Through these actions, the stories of spirits remain active rather than fading into distant legend, returning again with every cycle of planting and return. Even journeys and adventures follow the same logic. Heroes leave familiar places, confront trials, learn restraint, and eventually come home carrying experience rather than conquest. Their departures are not final breaks, they are episodes in a wider movement of departure and return. The road outward and the road home are parts of a single shape, and whatever is gained along the way becomes a contribution to the world they re-enter. Travel does not end the story. It widens it and then brings it back to where it began, now changed but still connected. The heavens also participate in this cycle of renewal. Celestial order may seem calm and enduring, but it adapts as eras shift, as beliefs develop, and as stories reinterpret the roles of gods and officials. The Jade Emperor's court is not a frozen tableau. It reflects the same processes of reassessment found on Earth, suggesting that balance must be maintained through ongoing attention rather than assumed as permanent. In this way, myth reinforces the idea that stability is something created again and again. The Great Flood, the shaping of rivers, the mending of the sky, and the restoration of peace all illustrate the same principle. Disaster does not mark an absolute ending. It marks a turning point where patient labor and shared purpose guide the world back toward order. The memory of these events becomes a reminder that renewal often arises from cooperation rather than conflict. The world is not saved once and for all, it is cared for continually, through many cycles of effort and repair. The Queen Mother of the West and her orchard of peaches express the passage of time in another form. The fruit ripens slowly, not in haste, and returns again only after long intervals. Those who partake in it do not step outside the cycle but become aware of its breadth. Time stretches, widens, and then circles back. The orchard does not vanish after one harvest. It waits, matures, and repeats, showing that endurance grows from patience rather than urgency. Across these stories, humans remain participants rather than masters. They act within a world that lives, changes, and responds. Their choices matter because they influence how the next turn of the cycle will unfold. Wisdom lies not in defeating change, but in moving with it, learning from the past while guiding the present toward a gentler repetition. In this sense, mythology becomes a guide for living, not merely a record of wonders. As the tales return to their beginnings, the listener understands that creation, rule, devotion, and journey are not isolated episodes. They are reflections of the same ongoing movement. The wheel turns, the seasons shift, old stories awaken in new contexts, and meaning flows quietly through every repetition. Nothing truly ends. Each closing moment becomes another opening, and the cycle continues, steady and enduring, across the vast horizon of time.